Hi, welcome to the Scientist Sage SANGHA. I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan from Wise Heart Wellness, and we're so happy to have you here with us tonight to talk about preferences. We've been having a very interesting discussion offline about preferences because it's been bitterly, bitterly cold up here in Canada. And we were chatting about the fact that we generally prefer warmer, a little bit warmer than that. And it's interesting the way preferences play out. And what I want to focus on is different kinds of preferences and just the whole process of having preferences. In the email that I sent out, I was talking about a particular person's view on why we should let go of our preferences. And it really, there's so many subtle ways that they influence us and might limit us, or it could be more impactful than that too. But both ways are worth taking a look at. Because if we don't look beyond our preferences, notice what they are, then we don't know that there's really any other choices. They've dropped into the background, into the subconscious mind, and drive our life from there. So we want to look a little bit deeper than that. So this idea that there's right now, especially in the world right now, there's some issues about all the preferences because we actually get worn out by our preferences. And we just have so many of them in today's world. Previously, we didn't have quite that many. And so, if you lived on a farm and raised things, you might have a preference for no hail to ruin your crops or that your best cow doesn't run away, but they weren't as invasive. Now we have so many things, and the other big part of it is we have so many things at our very fingertips. So we can press a button and have something that we prefer, that we want, that we think is going to make our life so much better in a matter of 24 hours. It can be on our doorstep. And so it's really interesting to see how preferences pan out. I knew from a lot of people that I've worked with eating disorders that when the pandemic came along and it became really natural and normalized to order food, that the preferences that people had were not necessarily being illuminated. People that were a little bit emotionally uncomfortable, that sort of thing, they could order food, any kind of food, any time of day and night, have it delivered directly to their door, don't even have to talk to a real person. And that fed a lot of people's addiction. And so there's really interesting ways that these preference ideas play out. Another thing about it is that just the information, just the incredible, overwhelming amount of information. And we're distracted. We're distracted by things, and we're distracted by people telling us what our preferences might be or should be. And so when we see things and we see that that person has this thing, so they have that life, and we would prefer that life to the one we may be experiencing, then we think that that thing will get it, whatever that thing might be. The all advent of dating apps and all of the things that they list about people and that sort of thing, and people sort of course for their preferences, where they might meet someone really wonderful and unusual to them, but they got sorted out because of their preferences. So it's a very interesting thing, this idea about preferences. And when we are just being in search of getting our preferences met, then we don't really think about personal growth or transforming ourselves, things like that. We're just so preoccupied by our preferences and being able to get them and just stay in that place of, I want this next thing. And unfortunately, what happens when we do get something we want, it rarely lasts a long time that we don't develop a brand new preference. preference. Maybe more of the same, or another one of a different color, or the newest model. And we're literally being programmed into that sort of thing. And so we don't know that place of, I'm good as I am. I don't need anything. And that is a really challenging thing because we don't find peace in all those preferences, only a glimpse of peace. But we don't find lasting peace in all those preferences. We find lasting peace when we go beyond those preferences. And so it might literally distract us from the things we really do want, as opposed to a preference. A preference might get really in our subconscious, and we don't like to be uncomfortable. And I would say that, getting a different job or going back to school or really seriously looking for someone that we could spend the rest of our lives with takes a lot of being uncomfortable. And so if we're preferring not to be uncomfortable and just keep looking for the next preference, we can be misled. A lot of people literally will marry somebody or take a job believing that it is meeting their preferences, but then find out when they get in the job it isn't, because their preferences aren't what they thought they were. So as we go along with all of this, we want to reveal what our preferences are, get a look at them, and see if we are compulsively chasing those preferences, blindly going through the routine of preferences, or if this is something that actually may be expanding our life. And so it's not that we shouldn't have any preferences ever. It's about our attachment to those preferences. And this has been a discussion in Buddhist literature for thousands of years. So as we look into that a little more, when we notice that we have preferences, what are we doing with them? Are we imposing them on other people? Are we chasing them? Are we changing them as soon as one preference gets satisfied? All sorts of things like that. The other part of this that is really problematic is that we can come to think reality should behave as we wish it to, because it's our preference. So maybe we marry somebody who, we fall madly in love with, but they don't have a preference for monogamy. And so that may be problematic to us. And we feel like that's not right because our idea of how things should be is actually a preference. But we can look at other people saying they're doing something wrong because they don't follow along with our preferences. And we don't often really dive deep with other people to find out what their preferences are, particularly if they differ from ours. And the kinds of preferences that cause more and more problems can be things like racism, sexism, ageism, the idea, what we call sort of, it could be fake news, things like that, but it might appeal to our preferences, so we embrace it. And so there's lots of things going on. But if we can pay attention, and it's not easy because we can just, roll with our preferences through life, and we don't have to feel uncomfortable. We don't have to feel let down or that we are dissatisfied. We can just ignore it and go and get another thing that comes close to satisfying a preference. But spiritually speaking, it's really important to pay attention, is not to just go and grab the next thing we think will feed our preferences, like the Buddhists call hungry ghost behavior, but literally is paying attention to where these preferences, these leanings, taking me. Are they taking me to create this bigger life where I get to discover new things about myself and life and people in general? Or are they limiting me? Are they limiting me with, I don't like those kinds of people, or I don't like those kinds of activities, or I don't think this is a good idea, or I don't think this is fair. Lots of preferences that just go along and really start narrowing our capacity to be involved in life. And our heart is naturally set open As you can see with little children, they are excited about everything that comes their way, and they enthusiastically embrace it. And what we want to be doing is to be able to renew that heart. And not that we won't discern, like grabbing a hot, bright thing that might burn us. Discernment is different, and it's a natural sort of outflow from being present and just paying attention to the world as it is. Like to jump out of the way of a car, we don't stand in front of a speeding car and say, I prefer to live, but here's what life is presenting. We instinctually, way below our level of, decided preferences, jump out of the way of the car. And so, or take our hand away from something hot. We're not talking about taking away those natural instincts, but we are inviting you right now to just work on your own list of preferences. What kinds of things that you have in your life that you know are preferences, and then just sort of look at them. What is this doing for my life? I can be uncomfortable meeting new people, but once I get past that initial discomfort, I love to find out about people and see what ideas or experiences they've had, share those with people. So that's something that's really important in my life, actually. But the discomfort of meeting somebody new can be problematic for me. So I'll just have you note, if you're listening, feel free to note down some preferences that you see emerge in your life. And they might be good ones, and they might be ones that limit you. So just notice. And so particularly, I work often with people with real negative preferences or real limiting preferences. And so anything that keeps them out of the flow of light and love and life, we want to know about. And lots of people often say, I like to be alone. I'm a loner. That's what I really like. And it turns out that that's not necessarily the case. There's lots of other things that are underlying it, but it's easier to be a loner. And what I find out is often they want connection, but they don't like the discomfort of connection. That's a really common thing, just like myself. Now, so once again, we want to come back to being the loving observer of ourselves. Okay. So if we can do that and overcome our preference for perhaps looking good or feeling strong or feeling right, that's another one that may get in my way. And embrace every moment. We have a really different experience in life. We have a lot more flow, we have a lot more opportunity. But so when we do that, we actually start to feel more open and peaceful, and different things come through our lives because we are not shutting the door so tightly against things that might go against our preferences. So what I want to just give you a couple of examples about, and then when we wrap it up, we'll do a little meditation about the idea of noticing preferences and how to move through them and see what's beyond them. Because basically, one of the issues we have is we have all these experiences, and sometimes they leave us with preferences. Well, sometimes, often. They're somehow evaluated by preferences we have, or they may initiate new ones. As an addict, I know it when I would eat a food that had that, what they call hyperpalatable, my brain would go, wow, this is great. And I would develop an immediate preference for the dopamine level that food hit in my brain. And that's the way the foods were wired. They were made in formulas like that to give you those preferences. And so the things that are going on through your life are not the problem, but our filter and the idea of holding on to them as a preference can be, okay? And so we're not supposed to accumulate everything, preferences or good or bad for everything that goes through our life. But then how do we process that experience? And I like to talk about it as there's a lot of experience accumulating. And if we can let it move through, we can have lots of wonderful experiences, and they have more subtle layers upon us rather than the big grab for we have to have more of this or we're staying away from that entirely. And the problem is our filter. And we have, if we don't filter, then we accumulate things. And those things that are accumulated make up our stuff that we filter everything through. And we can develop even kind of an addiction to our stuff, our filters, and we don't want to change them. And so it's an interesting thing to start looking at and seeing, just seeing, we're not making anybody drop anything. And we start with the idea that we are living on the rarest of planets. And it's shone on by this bright star that creates viable warmth for us humans. And it creates some other cool things that we need to keep fed and alive and comfortable enough for us just to be talking about this on technology that is provided for us. And so this is an amazing thing. If I start there, maybe I don't need to prefer too much else. Back it way up, like, do I really need this, or must I have it my way? Do I need control of everything around me? Because the planet's taking care of me well on its own. Usually when humans start to interfere, it gets not as good, actually. But if I see my collection of things, then I have a chance to shed. And that's amazing. So if I don't do that, then it can pile up and pile up to where I can't see it anymore. It's beyond my view and it becomes my life as opposed to my preference. And we're actually just not actually even biologically built to accumulate all of this junk that is coming towards us all the time at this point in the world evolution. So we have a lot more information than at any other time in the world. If a terrible thing happens anywhere in the world, we are likely to know about it by 9 in the morning. And so we have a lot of things, and a lot of those things have big emotional content. And so they sort of stick in us, and that builds up. And if we get too full, like quite literally, our brain only has a certain capacity. If we keep trying to force it without letting anything go, without labeling anything, irrelevant, we don't need that, then it actually begins to work poorly. And so once we understand that we really need to curate our collection of stuff very carefully and let go of the rest of it. And a lot of the things that people keep are things from bad experiences from childhood that were useful at the time to navigate the world, but they no longer are, but we don't even know their preferences. And it could be simple things like when you see somebody in a gray sport jacket, you remember that your uncle wore that at your father's funeral, and you get very distressed, and you don't want to go around and be around people then. And it might be that it's a blue car, and that was your first date that you went on that went horribly wrong. So now you don't like blue cars anymore. But we don't know those things. They just express as we go through life, and they limit our life. So this idea of the Dalai Lama talks about like surfing a wave. So we don't have to, dive into that wave. We want to surf the top of it and just move along. And we are on the top of the wave, and then it dies down and we're slightly going like that. And we turn around and just see what the next wave is. We don't keep trying to chase that wave that's finished itself on the beach, pushing ourselves to put our board on the water in the beach and waiting for that to be different. It's not going to be different. But if we are in the sea of life, we can wait, and there'll be new, different waves, different things to experience. So this idea about it, I really go with the idea that Michael Singer talks about, starting by talking to ourselves a little differently. Whatever we're feeling, whenever a disturbance comes up, we can say, I can handle this. I can handle this. So I'm not swearing at a bad driver or telling everybody in the world about what poor service I received somewhere, or complaining about the cold weather all over the place, or suffering from something's happened a long time ago, maybe a death, a loss, an accident, an illness, an injury, and it's still commanding a lot of my energy and consciousness. And there are ways to let go of these. So to get back to that natural state of heart, being wide open to life, we need to do things like pay attention to when we have those come up. And we can start by just recognizing that, "Oh, there's something there. I feel sort of grabbed." Somebody said, "Would you like coffee or tea?" And I go, you know, and maybe I have an attitude about coffee. And I go, wow, I don't need to know that it was because, everybody laughed at me because I was drinking tea or I tasted coffee and it was horrible. I don't need to know those details. I just need to know that little clench. And then I can go, oh, wait a minute, I have a clench. And then I can breathe through the preference. And the preference might be strong. It might be that, I'm cold. I'm going to go and get a sweater right now. And I go, oh, wait, let me just sit in this for a minute and let it go. Actually have the mental thought that I am letting that move through me, that I don't need to stuff it back down and save it for another time to keep me safe from the cold. I can just go, oh, look at, I'm having that feeling of anxiety, or I'm feeling like I don't want to be cold and I need to get a sweater right now, and have that little energy of disturbance. And then we can see what else is behind that. And we can go along and go, that's interesting. And it doesn't mean that I don't go and get a sweater. It means I stop and feel that urgency. And I just take a breath. So I literally stop and recognize it. Then I breathe my way through that feeling, that preferential feeling. And then I can play with my mind a little bit more. And maybe my mind tells me, well, this is because of that. And I go, oh, interesting. I'm still going to release it. And I might ask for help to release it. I might say, oh, to the God of my understanding, or to, whatever it is that I find strength from, I let this go right now. And so we open up there. Now, this doesn't mean we sit around doing nothing ever. People think about that. Well, if I didn't have any preferences, I wouldn't ever do anything. And it's no, because often when we get rid of that itchy urge, basically, then we sit a little bit longer and there's some other inner direction. And so we can surrender what's there and open up to different possibilities. Just today, I was dropping my car off for some repair, and I really wanted a ride home. And I couldn't find a ride, and then someone offered, and I thought, oh, that's too far for them to drive out of their way, and I thought I'll just pay an Uber. And then I was sort of fretting about it while I was dropping the car off. And this lovely gentleman looked up and said, and will you need a ride home? And I was like, oh, yes, of course I will. And the problem was solved without any of my itchy, bitchy, twitchy stuff going on. I didn't need to do that. I just needed to open to the next moment in life. And there were many other options, but I was sort of stuck on those things that I might normally do. So just this idea, opening up to the next thing. And it's like the movie you may have seen about where the main character says yes to everything for a day. And what if we did that? There's a Buddhist saying that the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. And so often we think about spirituality as a difficult thing. We have to behave well and we have to take time for it and that sort of thing. But if we don't have a lot of preferences, that's the natural way. We actually come to that and relax into it. So I invite you to do a little meditation with us, to just explore some preferences. And maybe there are things that you're going to really want to let go of, and maybe there's things that you're just curious about. So again, this isn't about a forced march away from your preferences. I'm probably never going to start drinking coffee. I don't like the taste of it. And I don't know why that is. but it's not a huge inconvenience or a huge problem or a huge limiting part of my life. So I'm probably just going to go along with that. There may be other things like my nervousness around meeting new people that I would like to start to work with release about, because I believe very much that releasing that preference could expand my life in lots of ways that I might not otherwise think about. Okay, so just get comfortable, close your eyes, go off screen if you want to, and take a big breath and just notice anything in your environment that might be catching you. And just think, I can handle this for a couple of moments. And I'm going to breathe and release. I notice at this moment that I'm feeling a little warm. And I have a preference not to feel that warm. But I'm just going to explore it for a moment. Recognizing it and breathing in and just releasing. And interestingly, there's a nice little release right there. I don't feel so annoyed by being warm. I don't feel so annoyed by things outside right now. I can just be in a calm state in my own body with my own mind. It's not having a big discussion about lots of things. When we do this, we improve our physical health as well as our literal brain health and our mental health. Because if you're like me, you might notice that you're just be sitting there enjoying life, and all of a sudden, a voice in your head starts ifing about something. Well, it would be better if it was like this. Or what if this happens? Or what if you've forgotten something? And all that ifing for preferential ways of being in the world can cause me to lose that nice, deep connection with myself, where I might be enjoying this moment immensely. Or I might actually be in this moment, not being in the next one. Not thinking that I'll prefer the next moment to this moment. I might feel that I'm moving outside my comfort zone. I might have had a preference for staying in my comfort zone. But by even releasing that for just a moment, I might find out I don't actually have a comfort zone, because my mind is constantly thinking of a more comfortable zone. So often one preference leads to another. And again, you can just think about releasing the next preference. Anything that is in the way of just deeply enjoying this moment right here, right now. And it's not looking for enjoyable things, but just opening up, letting life flow right through you. The person with the most freedom is the one with the least preferences. I hope you've enjoyed tonight and have an interesting week exploring your preferences. Perhaps even letting them go and enjoying your experiences. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be.